Welcome back to the Beautifully Intentional podcast. In today's episode, I'm going to be continuing on with our marriage series. And in this episode, I'm going to share a season of me and Dustin's marriage that was the hardest thing we ever had to walk through together. And simultaneously, like the most love I've ever felt from any human being on the planet. So this episode is where I'm going to get real vulnerable with you, and it's not something that I love to talk about, but I do love to share because although it's an ugly story, redemption is just so much more beautiful than anything that we can ever walk through, and I'm willing to share my story to give you hope that redemption is available for every single soul on the planet, period. So listen in, and here we go. Welcome to the Beautifully Intentional podcast, where I share stories to encourage you to live a more intentional life. Whether it's in your motherhood journey, your friendships, your 9-to-5 job, or pursuing just radical dreams. I believe that sometimes we can just get stuck in the mundane craziness of life, and all it takes is one encouraging word to give us hope to live for something greater. I share stories of living intentional through the simple things like self-care, clean spaces, parenthood, and going after your dreams. My hope is that at the end of every episode, there's a fire set deep within your soul that says, I can do this, and that maybe today is your day to find the beauty in the things that go unnoticed and start living a more intentional life. This is Cassandra Lau, and welcome to Beautifully Intentional. Okay, so first let's talk about really quick how me and Dustin met. I can't remember if I've shared this in a previous episode or not, but anyway, just really quick. So I was 18 years old. I went to Disneyland with one of my really good friends, actually my friend who passed away that I talked about in a couple of episodes ago, and she introduced me to another couple. So I'm meeting this couple for the first time at Disneyland, and the guy says to me, he's like, I know I just met you, but I swear I know who your husband is. You have to meet him. And at this time, I had gone through a series of dating a few guys. I was kind of back and forth with like my high school sweetheart. And I was just at the place where I literally was not looking for a relationship. And isn't that what we all say when we're secretly like looking for a relationship? I'm just kidding. But by the end of the day, like he had talked me into meeting him. So I personally have to have a buffer person. So if it wasn't for Laura, I literally would have never met Dustin. Our children wouldn't exist. But she was willing to go to this random church with me to meet this random guy. And I remember shaking his hand thinking, oh my gosh, I wonder if this is my husband. And I'm 18 years old. I just graduated high school, maybe 9 months before this. So, at the time, so Dustin's 8 years older than me. So at the time he was 26 and he's like, get lost. I'm not going to date this 18-year-old girl. I'm so sure, But his roommate was a few years younger than him, and I had met his roommate through a different group of mutual friends. So anyway, so they ended up inviting me over and we would hang out, and we just became, really good friends. And what I love about the way that we met was that Dustin was not interested in me at all. So he was just himself, super goofy, not trying to impress me at all. But him not trying to impress me really impressed me. So I was just really into him. We became really good friends over the next couple of months. He couldn't help but fall in love with me. And so we ended up, we started dating, and then 8 months after dating, we got engaged. So by this point now I'm 19. We started dating. We got engaged at 8 months. We had a 4-month engagement. So by our 1-year dating anniversary, we were getting married. So it all happened really fast. I didn't feel like it was fast. I didn't feel like I was young. I feel like I knew what I was doing. Looking back now, I'm like, oh my gosh, I was a child. And so I had, at the time, a ton of backlash. I remember my pastor at the time was like, are you serious? You're seriously dating this 27-year-old, and you're seriously gonna, you've been dating him 8 months and you said yes, and what the heck? My mom was so pissed off. Now granted, at the time, my mom was in the depths of her PTSD and like manic depression and the whole deal, right? So she's at a place in her life where she can only see through the filter of her own pain and kind of associate everything that happens in life to her pain. So to see me as a 19-year-old getting married to somebody who she didn't really know, she didn't care to know, she didn't care to get to know, that was super painful to her. And so she definitely let me know. She did not hide how scared she was, every day. I pretty much had to reconvince her every day of why I was doing this and how I felt ready and I trusted him and I knew that he was a good person and he was somebody that I didn't want to let go of and he was somebody I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. And all she could think of was her when she was 19 and she was pregnant with her second child. She had already been like married and divorced. She, parents, or the father of her children was a drug addict and she was alone and all the pain she's ever gone through. So for her, just seeing it through that filter. So the whole engagement, which was only 4 months, but was really hard. I mean, every day I'm having to battle my mom, but meanwhile also like trying to convince my friends like it's okay, I'm not making like a stupid decision, but then also being really excited, and like wanting to marry this person and wanting to spend the rest of my life with this person and planning a wedding and doing all of that. So then come our wedding day, this is great. So I think I talked about I don't know if it was last week's episode or a couple weeks ago, but I know what it was. It was the episode about letting other people show up for you. And I talked a little bit about how on our wedding day or for our wedding, I handmade everything. So you can listen to that portion of it in that episode. Anyway, I'll skip that part. But anyway, so I handmade everything. So I'm not kidding you when I say every single decoration was in my car. Like every single decoration, the centerpieces, the gift favors, all the signs, flower petals, candle, like everything that you saw decorated was in my car because I bought it or I made it. It didn't come with the venue. It was in my car. And it was, okay, back up. Sorry. So this whole engagement, my mom's trying to beg me not to do this. The night before the wedding, she's bawling, she's losing it. She's like, you can't do this. You're ruining your life. I say goodnight to her. I go to bed. I get woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning to my mom begging me not to get married. I kick her out of my room. I go to bed. I wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning because for whatever reason, I was convinced that I was going to decorate my own wedding. Like looking back now, what was I thinking? Like, what a psycho. Why did I have to decorate my own wedding? I don't know, but I wanted to be the person to decorate the whole thing. Like, that's how much, like, control I wanted to have over how it looked. So I have all the decorations. I knew I had to get there at 6 o'clock in the morning because I knew that, by 1, we have the photographer coming. We have pictures we need to take. We need to get ready, the whole deal. So I'm leaving my house 6 o'clock in the morning. I have all the stuff in my trunk. I peek my head in my mom's room like, all right, Mom, like, gotta go, see ya. And she's losing it. She hasn't slept all night. She's literally hyperventilating, going into a panic attack, like, scenario. She's convulsing, she's shaking, and I'm like, I couldn't leave her like that, So I'm trying to, like, calm her down, and she's kind of going through these weird cycles of emotions of being, super, super upset, extremely irrational. And then we would talk about something kind of funny and she would start busting up laughing. And then we were having a good time. And then I felt like, okay, I can leave now. So I'm like, okay, I gotta go. And then it would hit again and she would cycle again. So I went through this roller coaster of emotions with her for about 4 hours. Meanwhile, my entire wedding party is texting me like, where are you? Like, you have all the stuff. We literally can't do a single thing without you. And I'm like, I know, I will be right there. I'm trying to calm my mom down. She's losing it. My mom basically says to me that if I walk out that door, that she was going to commit suicide. She didn't say it like in those words, but that's what she told me, was that she couldn't live with herself. She wouldn't be able to live knowing that I'm walking into a marriage when all she did was get destroyed by a marriage. So basically told me she was going to kill herself. if I got married that day. And now I had 2 younger siblings and they were at school. So I'm like thinking in my mind, like, are they going to come home to a dead mom? Like, what in the world am I supposed to do right now? Nobody prepares you for this. You know what I mean? Nobody prepared me for this moment right now. And I had to, in that moment, like in the midst of that moment, I had to decide, like, what is my worth? What is my life supposed to look like? I had to decide at, just barely turned 20, like that I can't let somebody else's, their trauma become my trauma. That like, if she couldn't live with this decision, that was her decision, not mine. I had to be okay with whatever the outcome was going to be. I had to decide, am I going to do this for me or am I going to do this for her? Am I going to call off my wedding the day of for her because of her trauma? Or am I going to potentially be responsible, quote unquote, for somebody's death if I walk out the door to live my life from my decision, So I had to decide in that moment, and I decided that I had spent the last, 5 or 6 years living my life to help my mom because, of all the trauma that she had gone through. I wanted to be there and I wanted to support her, but it had come to a point where I was now an adult and this is the life I wanted to live for myself. So I had to pack up my stuff and I had to say goodbye to her, which could have been the last time, and walk out the door. And I had to call my siblings and I'm like, look, mom's not doing good. Like, when you come in the house, tread lightly and like brace yourself because I don't know what you're going to find, My mom had told me that if I wanted her to come, then I couldn't invite any other family members because those family members were quote unquote responsible for this trauma that she'd gone through. So she didn't want to see them. So in the effort of hoping that my mom would be there, I didn't invite a single family member. So at my wedding, not a single family member. It was only filled with my friends, which really were my family. And my older sister, because she was over 18 and she could decide for herself at that point. She had already moved out, so she was in my wedding and I'm super grateful for that. My younger siblings were not allowed to come to the wedding because my mom said she didn't want them a part of it. So I get to the wedding, I get to the venue, the photographer's already there, ready to take pictures. Now, mind you, I have not set up the venue. I have all the decorations. I have not gotten ready. I have no hair. I have no makeup, no dresses on. The photographer's like, all right, we're ready to go, ready to party. At this point, all of my bridesmaids had to leave because they had to get ready. So I have a venue that's empty. I have all the stuff in my trunk. And I had to just give up all control because I literally had no other choice. So I had to call coworkers and say, like, I've had a rough morning. Can any of you come and help me decorate? And they were awesome. They dropped what they were doing. They came. I handed all the stuff to them. I said, I literally don't even care what you do. Here's all the decorations. Figure it out, So I get ready. I'm like trying to hold it together the entire time that I'm getting ready. Like, the makeup artist is doing my makeup and I'm crying at the same time because I'm like, what the heck is my life? What is this? That, like, 20 years old, I have no family here. I'm supposed to be getting married. It's supposed to be the happiest day of my life, but my mom's threatened to commit suicide if I do this. It's like, what in the world, So right before I'm supposed to walk down the aisle, I go to the bathroom and for whatever reason, I have an encounter with God. And I just feel this overwhelming presence. And I feel like God says, if you're going to do this anyway, then choose joy. And in that moment, something shifted in my spirit. And in that moment, I felt this overwhelming sense of joy. And I know that especially for somebody who might suffer from depression or anxiety and you have those like emotional struggles, it's so annoying when someone says, just choose joy, just choose to be happy, just get over it. And I don't know how else to explain it other than it was just God in the room, because I could not, that whole morning, I couldn't get myself out of this funk and I couldn't get myself to feel the excitement that I should have been feeling because it was so heavy. But in that bathroom, in that moment that I felt like God said that to me, choose joy. There was something in that moment that I agreed with it, that like, yes, I am doing this. I'm here. Like, I already walked out the door. I'm supposed to be walking down the aisle now. Like, I can do this. Like, joy came over me and I was able to enjoy the rest of the wedding. It was beautiful. Like, I walk into the ceremony and I'm like, oh my gosh, this looks so pretty. And then I walk into the reception area and I was literally blown away at how they were able to decorate the exact same way that I wanted to decorate. They were able to mimic, and I didn't give them any instructions. I literally said, here's the stuff, figure it out, you know? And so the whole thing was beautiful. I had so much fun. And even like to this day, people will still tell me like, your wedding was one of the most beautiful weddings I've ever been to. It was super unique and just so pretty. And like, I don't know, like people still talk about our wedding to me, and that means so much to me. Typically I wouldn't care about that stuff, but it means so much to me because I had to let go of so much control and expectation, and everything had to go out the window. And it was like, at the end of the day, this is about me marrying the person that I'm fighting to marry, you know? So anyway, so that's our wedding story. So we're starting off on a rough foot over here, okay? Like, typically, you know, it would be nice to start a marriage with like the support of your mom, so you can turn to be able to like, you know, like go through things. And I know a lot of you as listeners, like, you know, you've even lost your mom to death or to other things. And so you know what that feels like. But, so anyway, so we get married and, you know, meanwhile, I'm having so much fun, like in our relationship and in our new marriage. And Dustin was the best thing that's ever happened to me. He's an amazing husband. I'm happy as a clam. And meanwhile, actually before I met Dustin, I had met this guy and we became friends, and I literally never thought twice about our friendship because nothing was inappropriate. It's not like we hung out alone. And honestly, my whole life, I've always just had guy best friends, like my entire life. Up until I met Dustin, all of my friends were dudes. Like I had, you know, my core group of friends that were girls that, you know, I had met in youth group and they were like close to me, but I've always had guy best friends. There's just something about them that was no drama. I always felt protected. Like literally in school, literally guys who were my best friends literally fought other people for me. Like if they felt like somebody was a threat to me, or I don't know what it was, but guys were just like comforting to me to feel safe around. And again, they were just no drama. So I always had guy friends. That was never an issue. But then when I met Dustin, I knew like, okay, you can't have like, you know, guy best friends, like whatever. So anyway, so I met this other guy and we became friends, and long story short, all the details leading up to this particular event are irrelevant to the story, but that friendship ended in an affair 6 months after me and Dustin got married. So to which began the worst season of my entire life. You know, it's like you see affairs happen in the movies and they make it look like these women get swept off their feet by these like romantic dudes, or, you know, these guys fall in love with this hot secretary while their wife is at home being a raging bee. And like, not that I expected to feel a certain way when the affair happened, because I didn't expect the affair to happen. So I wasn't expecting to feel a certain way. But what the movies don't show you is the agonizing level of shame that one goes through when they make that kind of decision. Because a marriage covenant was never designed to be broken by another human being. And because we live in this broken, fallen world, it happens all the time, but it was never meant to be this way. So I find myself in this affair that I felt like I couldn't get out of, because the shame and the pain was so unbearable that I couldn't imagine hurting another human being to the level that I was hurting. So I couldn't tell Dustin because I couldn't imagine ever looking him in the face and seeing him in the level of pain that I was feeling. Like I couldn't tell my friends because I couldn't imagine the level of disappointment that they would have for me at the same level that I had for myself. Like I literally felt like there was nothing I could do other than just pretend it didn't happen, and just pretend like it didn't happen. And hiding something like to that magnitude was so heavy that I couldn't even eat. Like, I lost a ton of weight. I think at one point I weighed 103 pounds. People began to ask me if I was sick, like what was wrong with me, because I just looked ill. And not a day would go by when I wouldn't look at Dustin from like across the room and just with everything in me, just want to tell him everything just to get it off of my chest because it was so heavy. And yet simultaneously feeling so paralyzed by the shame that I couldn't imagine actually saying those words out loud. So I just suppressed. And for a season, I just kept like going back to that guy because he was the only one who knew what was happening. And I don't know, it was just this weird thing. Like I felt like he was the only one that I could talk to about it and how I was feeling because he was supposedly feeling the same way and he was the only one who knew about it. So after a few months of that, I realized that was only making the situation worse. Like anxiety was just through the roof. I got to a point where I actually literally was scared to drive on the freeway because I felt like the grace of God's hand had lifted off of my life, and at any point I would get in a car accident and die because I had no purpose left. And I know that sounds dramatic, but that's how I felt. Like I knew that the only way to make that feeling, that fear go away was to completely end it, cut it off, never speak to the guy again, and just turn to God, like get on my face and repent and dig really freaking deep down to the bottom of why, like why? And so I spent the next year and a half every single day coming before God and asking him to reveal to me why, like what was it in me that would allow such a level of deception and confusion, and what was in me that was hurting so bad that I felt like I needed to be okay with having an affair? Or like, why couldn't I just say no? Like I had so many questions about myself. I was so confused by my own deception. Like, anyway, so I had gotten down to a couple of things. I know that I didn't have any example of redemption. All I knew was divorce or hide. I literally never knew. I feel like I'm saying literally a lot in this episode because I don't know. I just feel like you guys need to know how literal these feelings were. But I had literally never known of someone to walk through this kind of thing in marriage and make it out alive. And granted, I was only 20 years old. And so, but yeah, and I know so many stories now, but at the time I was 20 years old. I was a baby. Like I literally couldn't even buy a beer. I was so young. So I had no example. I was the youngest of my friends to get married. Nobody had gone before me. The only people that I knew that had gone before me and had issues like this, they either hid their sin and their bad choices or they were divorced. And that was it. I knew that confession meant that I would be hurting somebody else. And so I had just resolved in my mind that I would take all of the burden of hiding and all of the shame and all of the pain, and I would just pretend like it never happened and hope that it would all go away. But it wasn't going away. So I spent that next year and a half, I was looking into myself and the why, and I came up with a couple of conclusions. I think that I had suppressed the pain of being abandoned and not having the affection of a father and a present mother and being a people pleaser for so long that when somebody who I cared about began to show me affection, although I had affection from my husband, I still didn't want to reject the attention and the affection that I was getting from this person, nor did I want to hurt his feelings and all kinds of other twisted mindsets. And this is not in an effort to blame my father for his absence, because I was an adult and I 100% had the responsibility to walk out my choices regardless of my upbringing, period. But this was also 13 years ago. Therapy was not widely accepted or easily acceptable or oh my gosh, I can't even say it. Accessible. Oh my God. Like it is now. In fact, I didn't even consider it an option because at the end of the day, I didn't really believe or think that there was anything wrong with me. I somehow thought that I escaped my childhood unscathed with no effects, Like, so at the same time that the affair happened, I was just in a place of suppressing. Like, I would just suppress everything because that's what I did my whole childhood. That's why I never talked about being fatherless. It's why when Dustin first met me, after a little while of dating, he asked me, he literally just looked at me one day and he was like, is there anything that you just aren't telling me? Because I feel like there's this whole person about you that I just don't know. And I was like, oh yeah, about that. I mean, at this point when we were dating, I really didn't talk much about my family situation, my upbringing, nothing. Like, what he knew about me was who I was at that moment. It was like, yeah, I'm a personal banker at B of A. I love ice cream. I love French fries. Like, you know what I mean? I love, like, I want to travel. I want to have fun. I'm a super nice person. But my life at home, everything that I was escaping, that was all suppressed. So he knew that there was, like, had to be more to me. So he was like, so, like, really, like, tell me about yourself, you know? And so I was able to just really tell him, like, man, it's like, I have a mom who is a hoarder, so you probably don't ever want to come to my house because it's gotten really bad. She wasn't like that when I lived there, but as I've moved out, like, it's gotten really, really bad. I don't have a dad. I've been around a lot of abuse, like around like a lot of, really dysfunctional things. And so once I let that all out, he was like, okay, there we go. There it is. Like, there's all like, there is some pain. There is some like stuff that you've gone through. Like, that's what I'm looking for, like the realness, So anyway, so I just suppressed. And when it came to like making that terrible decision, I just suppressed it. So there was that. I also think that I learned that in that season I got to like, I think in that season when I got to the place of having an affair, it was also because I just didn't listen to conviction, to be honest. I had conviction about certain things leading up to that point. Like, I knew certain things were off, but I just ignored that conviction. Like, I just ignored it. And God is so gracious and kind to us. Like, there's a reason why we get that Jiminy Cricket, check in your spirit feeling that things are off. There's a reason. That is God's grace as a warning to us, because He will not control us. He will not control our actions. In His love, we are given free will. So, like, I do the same thing with my own children. I let them know when they're going to do something that is harmful, like to themselves, but I don't control them. If my kids are going to like jump off something, I warn them, like, dude, I wouldn't do that if I were you. Like, you're going to get hurt unless it's something that I feel like they're going to break. Then I'm like, no, that's mine. That belongs to me. But you know what I mean? Like, I don't follow my kids around physically controlling them. I encourage them that, like, if you don't eat your food, you're gonna be hungry later. But I don't take their spoon and shove food down their throat and make them eat so that they don't feel hunger. And I feel like God convicts us over something, and those are His warnings to us. And I ignored those warnings leading up to what actually happened. And if I would have acted on the very first conviction that I ever had, literally nothing would have ever happened. Like, I wouldn't have the story to tell you, and I know that for a fact. So I'm in this season, I'm finding out my why and my how, but I knew that, like, I needed God like never before. Like, this was the first time that I felt like, no, I'm actually in need of God. And the only way that I felt like I could come back to God was to literally just, oh, here I go with the literalies. I'm sorry, you guys. This, you're just going to have to bear with me. I literally had to just open up my physical Bible and start at Genesis 1. I'm not kidding. And I just begged God to speak to me. I'm like, I'm going to open up your word and we're going to start from the beginning. And I need you to speak to me because I don't know who I am anymore, So I got to the verse when it was after Adam and Eve had already eaten the apple and they were hiding, and God was walking through the garden and He was looking for them. Can I just say that God knew where they were? Like, He didn't have to look for them, but He was teaching them a lesson that they were hiding from Him. He wasn't hiding from them. So Because I think so often we feel like, God, where are you? Where are you? And he's like, I'm out here. You're the one hiding behind the bush. You're the one hiding from me. So anyway, so then as he's looking for them, he finds them and he asks them to come out. He's like, all right, Adam, come out. And they say, well, we can't because we're naked. And God's reply to them is significant. He said, who told you you were naked? He could have said, well, why are you naked? Like, what happened? Like, what's going on? He said, who told you you were naked? And can I just say that God knew who told them they were naked? But he wanted them to answer the serpent so that it could be a reminder to them that the shame they were feeling because of their nakedness was not shame that was put on them by God, but rather the shame of their own choices that they made out of being enticed by the enemy. Shame was never given to us by God because shame causes us to hide from God. And God wanted them to know that what they were feeling wasn't from him. So the next thing that happens in that garden is also significant because God asks them to come out and he lists off all the consequences to their sin because there are consequences to our sin. And then he clothes them. He covers their shame. He makes it so that they can walk out into the world and not feel ashamed of their nakedness. He can't undo their choices. And there's consequences for our sin, but we were never meant to walk in shame. So God clothes us. He doesn't have to do that. He didn't have to do that. He could have said like, yeah, you're naked now. And now you realize what your sin did. And now you're going to feel shame and you're going to have to live the rest of your life feeling that shame before man. Like that could have been, and we would have deserved it. We would have earned it. You know what I mean? But God doesn't do that because he's like, shame isn't from me. And if that means I have to clothe you so you can walk out into the world and be clothed by me, then I will do it. And he does it. And in that moment that I read that, I recognized that God doesn't hide from me, I hide from him. And that he doesn't put the shame on me that I have been carrying because of my choices. And lastly, that God clothes me. And I knew that I was safe to come out from hiding. And I knew that in God's grace, I was loved and I was forgiven for exactly who I am, regardless of my choices, period. So I walked out that year just knowing that I was forgiven, just beginning to walk in that freedom. I could eat again. I started gaining weight again. I was no longer scared to drive on the freeway. And although I began to walk in that forgiveness, just knowing that God forgave me, I knew that it would only be through confession that I would feel freedom. Like I would read the verse over and over that confess your sins before man that you may be healed. And I knew that I still had a wound in my heart that needed to be healed because of confession, because I needed to confess, and not just to God. Like my forgiveness came from God, but I knew that before man, like I needed to confess to Dustin. So I'm going on this journey with God. I had decided that I would tell Dustin, but I had originally decided I would tell him when we were 100 or on my deathbed. I knew that at some point I had to confess, but I just wasn't ready. Just straight up, I wasn't ready. Until I woke up one morning, and there was these 3 consecutive days in a row that each time I opened up my Bible, I felt like God said, prepare yourself to confess because through your confession, thousands will be healed. And I did not know what that meant. And I still don't really know what that means. But on that first day, I actually, for a moment, I felt complete, full healing and restoration. And it was so freaking freeing. It was God showing me that true freedom feels like it was like God was allowing me to feel what true freedom feels like after you confess. Like once you actually get it out, and all of a sudden, I felt it. It was like I felt free, and I was I began to weep oh my gosh, this is what it physically feels like to be free. And then all of a sudden the anxiety set in again, and then I couldn't eat again. And then I feel like I was walking on eggshells the whole rest of the day because I knew that God was up to something and I had no idea why. But I knew that it was time because I was tired of living in a lie. And when I tasted that freedom of what true freedom really felt like, I wanted that back, and I wanted that back for the rest of my life. So I knew that was only going to come through confession. So I'm like preparing myself, and I feel sick to my freaking stomach, but I'm like preparing myself. I didn't know how I was going to do it, when I was going to do it. I just knew that on that third day, I specifically knew that was the day. And through another series of events that I'll spare you the details of, I confessed and I told Dustin that I had had an affair with this person. And Dustin had two choices. Well, actually, he had a lot of choices. He could have literally handled it however he wanted to, and I was prepared for the worst. Like, I was prepared for divorce. I was prepared that he was going to be, this was the last time I was going to stay in our house. I was prepared to go back and live with my mom, like, you name it. But, so he took the news that I had shared, and he went to the other room to pray. And he asked God, how was he supposed to handle this? You know what I mean? Meanwhile, I'm left in the other room feeling like I had just ripped apart the one person that I love. And, he was gone for a while, and he's praying, and he comes back and he said, I want to know everything, but before you get started, I want you to know that you're forgiven. This part gets me every time. It's been like 13 years, and this gets me every time. He said, but when I went away and I prayed and I asked God what I'm supposed to do, he said, you're invited to love your wife the same way that I love my bride, which is the church, which is us, which is humanity. And he said, I'm going to choose to love you with that same love that God has for us. And in that exact moment, I was healed. Like, literally, the feeling of pain that I had been carrying around since the moment that it happened, that pain was healed. That's not to say that we didn't walk through a bunch of mud over the next few years, because while I was getting healed, he was going through pain. And while I was receiving grace, he was receiving betrayal. So we had to walk through that. And it would come in waves. Some months would be really good and some months would be really bad. But at the end of the day, we knew that we were committed to each other. And he chose to love me the same way that God loves all of us. And he didn't have to do that. But that level of grace was so healing to me. What happened next after the confession, literally within like this whole period of time, just made the situation so much more messy than it appeared, because come to find out that that same person had multiple affairs, half of which were in our church, others that were not, which did two things for my heart. Number one, it made me feel like I wasn't alone. I'm just going to be honest, straight up. It was almost relieving. And I know that's kind of sick and twisted to say, but that's just where I was at the time, because up until that point, I felt so alone. I felt like I was the only person on the planet who was so terrible of a human being that I would do something like that. And then all of a sudden, I didn't feel so alone. It felt like, oh my gosh, I'm not the only one. I didn't feel like I was the only person that could have an affair. I felt like I was a normal human being. Hear me on this. I was a normal human being, you guys. I had convictions. I loved God. I went to church every Sunday. I went to youth group. I read my Bible. I was a part of serving nonprofit organizations. I worked with youth. I wasn't the typical homewrecker that you see in the movies. You know what I mean? So to find out that there were actually other people just like me falling into the same kind of sin, that was honestly actually relieving for me. But with that also meant that there was a lot of pain, because it turned our church upside down. So many people were hurting like me, and that hurt me so bad to know that they were hurting like me. You know what I mean? I also, while I felt seen and I felt a little bit more normalized and not alone, I was also hurting for them. So many marriages were just in shambles. So everybody kind of just dispersed. We lost our core group of friends. And I'm only telling you this part because truly I believe that this whole part is irrelevant to my personal story. I could just leave that part of the story out and my story still stands alone the same, regardless of what else happened. But I just want to paint the picture for you that we didn't walk through this with all kinds of support. It was a crap show. And everything that we thought we knew, we didn't. And we were broken, and so was half of our church. And I had friends telling me that they couldn't be my friends anymore because they were so disappointed in me. I had friends disown me, call me angry, you name it. And this wasn't just walking this out with me and my husband. Like, I had to walk through that disappointment with everyone around me. And like, you don't even want to know the rumors that were started about me. Like, they were sick. And the names that I was called and the things that people had to say and all of the opinions. Like, imagine the worst, and it was probably that, which was my biggest fear, especially from someone who's a people pleaser, and especially from someone who had zero intention of hurting anybody, let alone everybody, you know? So our church is falling apart. And again, I'm only telling you that part so that you know that if you are in a situation, I promise you, we will get to the light at the end of the tunnel. But like, what we had to walk through wasn't just something that I went through. I'm talking about, like, it was messy. Okay, I'm going to move on from that part. But so we were given two choices. There's always a fork in the road, and we have the choice to walk away from the church, like, just in general, not our church, just the church. We could have walked away from the church. We could have walked away from God. And but like, we had a choice to figure this whole life thing out on our own, to like denounce everything we've ever known and believed in at our core, or choose to walk in grace and to face it and to not run from it, to lean into the pain and to learn from it instead of running from the pain. So we chose to stick around and fight the good fight, and a beautiful thing happened. The grace-filled ones came out. Grace doesn't have to look like much. Listen to me on this. Like, I remember shortly after it had all come out, and it was literally a week later, we got invited to a party. And like, I walk into this party. We didn't want to go. Like, who wants to show up to a party a week after you find out that, like, not only is your marriage in shambles, but like, your church is flipped upside down and it's ugly and you don't want to be seen, honestly. But we knew that we needed it. So, and again, we weren't running from the pain. We were going to lean into it. We were going to like take it for what it was, and we were going to figure it out. So we went to this party, and I will never forget one of my friends who was there. She just gave me a hug. And I'm not kidding. I still remember it to this day. It was a simple hug. Like, I'm crying right now thinking about it. It was a hug. That's all she had to do. Like, the love that you show to people in their weakest season is sometimes like the most impactful thing you can do. Like, I'll forget an inspirational quote 2 seconds after I read it. But I still remember the hug of one person, or the one person who said, "Man, I'm sorry you went through that. I love you anyways." Like, impact, let's talk about something for a second. Impact isn't a ton of followers on Instagram. I'm sorry. Impact isn't standing on a stage and preaching a message that leaves people feeling all warm and fuzzy for an hour. Impact is actually loving the people who have hurt you, or the people who are going through something super messy. Like, actively loving the people in your life regardless of where they're at in theirs. We don't get to control other people. And all the ways they're going to let us down and disappoint us and wound us. Like, we literally have no control over people's actions. The only thing we can control is what we offer to the relationship, period. We can't control whether someone receives or rejects our love. We can't control what they do with it. The only thing we can control is ourselves. And grace is the most impactful thing you can give someone. Mostly your spouse. Honestly. Now, while we're on the topic of like not being able to control people and not controlling other people but ourselves, I do want to speak really quick into that. I am by no means supporting abuse or even betrayal. Like, this has nothing to do with sticking around a dangerous scenario. You have to get to a place with enough self-awareness to be able to say, no, this is not for me. This is not my life. And I need to protect my mind, my body, my heart, and I need to get out. And honestly, you are the only person that can decide that, because you're the only person actually going through the abuse. So whether it is physically, mentally, or emotionally, and yes, I believe they are all equally as damaging. When I say give grace to someone, I am not promoting continued abuse. Like, hear me on this. And I cannot define for you what that looks like in your own life. You are the only one who gets to decide your value, your worth, what's disrupting your peace. And when it's time to get out, that is up for you to decide. But for me, I'm just telling you that when I came to a place of repentance, every single time someone literally, simply gave me a hug and said, I love you, I was getting healed all over again. Every single text message that I received that simply said, I'm thinking about you in this season, was healing all over again. Dustin could have told me, unfortunately, I can't trust you again, and you broke our vows, and I can't get past it. And we could have gotten divorced. And my healing would have had to just come in a different way. But you have the right to remove yourself from people who are directly dysfunctional in your life and set up healthy boundaries. And we'll get to that maybe in a different episode. But in any way possible, extend grace for the people that are in your life who are going through junk. So I had a friend who, she opened up to me about, we opened up to her and her husband about what me and Dustin were going through. And she didn't cast stones. She literally said, I am so sorry that you felt like you couldn't come to me. I love you and I am here for you. And I know that what you're going through is painful and I'm sorry. She wasn't offended. She didn't allow her disappointment to portray that on me and dump that on me. It was so relieving. It was so relieving. And I will never forget that love that I felt from her. It's been years and I can still feel that love. Years later, she actually ended up going through a divorce, and all I could think about was the way that she made me feel. So I reached out to her with that same love. It was a simple text message. I just said, hey, I know you're going through a divorce. I don't know any details. I just know that divorces are messy and they're painful. So I am here for you. If you ever need anything, reach out. You are loved. You are beautiful. And even in this season, if people don't understand you and your decisions, I love you anyway. Do you know what her reply was? Her reply was, you have no idea what that means to me because it's been 6 months and you're the only person who has ever reached out. What? In 6 months, I was the only person to reach out to her? Why? Because people don't understand why she left her husband? What? People are going to make decisions that we may not agree with. They're going to do things that we don't love. But does that make people unlovable? Absolutely not. Does that make them worthy of not receiving grace? Absolutely not. So I'm writing out this episode. I'm about to record it. I know of another friend who was going through divorce. I reach out to her hey, just want to let you know that I'm thinking about you. I know divorces are painful. I know that they're messy. You are loved. You are beautiful. If you need anything, reach out. Do you know what her response was? Thank you so much for reaching out because it's been months and I have never felt so alone because no one has reached out to me. What? If you get nothing else from this message, this whole episode, hear me on this. If you know someone who is going through a painful time in their life, regardless of whether you agree with it or you support it or it offends you or it hurts you, reach out in grace. Extend grace. I am begging you because you have no idea, unless you've been on the receiving end, you have no idea how healing it is to just know that you're not alone. That's it. I'm not asking you to give all your money to them, to invite them into your life to spend all of their time with you. I'm not asking them to suck the life out of you. I'm not promoting them to continue to abuse you. They can get anyway, hear me on this. I don't want to blur lines about people who are directly maybe abusive to you, but let's just even say if you know someone or you have a extended friend or a friend, extend grace. I am begging you. Okay, so we're going to move on from that. So here we are, we're 13 years later. We're still going strong. We're not freed from hardships. And I mean, we've had a lot of them. which just makes us just like you, because I have not yet met one person or one couple who has not gone through the trenches at some point in their life or in their marriage. But isn't that the purpose of the gospel? Is that at some point in our life, we are all in need of a savior? Like, we cannot save ourselves. When we get to a place when we realize that we cannot save ourselves, that is the moment. That is the moment that the blood of Jesus was not poured out in vain. And that will carry you through every season of your entire life. I remember, like, before I had an affair, I remember thinking, yeah, I know that I sin. Like, I know that I've made bad choices. But I never felt like I was desperate for God, if that makes sense. And it's sad to say, and I'm just being honest, but I always felt like I was a pretty decent human being. I felt like, yeah, I'm a good person. Like, yeah, maybe I've made some like questionable decisions, but I've made some pretty good decisions in my life. Like, I have been there for people. I have served. I've been a good person. I've not, I don't know, but at some point, whether it is now or later, we will all get to a point where we realize, oh no, like, I am messed up and I need a savior. And I hope that we don't all get to that point. And it doesn't even necessarily have to equate like, I made this really terrible decision, I need a savior. Sometimes it's just, I can't help myself, I need a savior. It's that I am suffering from anxiety so bad, I need relief, I need a savior. So I know for some people listening who may not have that kind of relationship with God, or you don't even believe in God or the Bible, and this is just a bunch of BS to you, I get that. Like, I've been at very real, scary times in my life and have had no faith. And those are some of the emptiest seasons of my entire life. But I can't separate what saved our marriage from God, because it's the key factor that brought Dustin to a place of extending like unconditional grace and forgiveness, and for me, receiving peace and healing. So that's the story, man. I hope you can find encouragement in this episode, regardless of where you find yourself. Whether you are single, dating, engaged, married, divorced, whatever, I just want you to know that you are loved, period. In the midst of your worst failures, you are loved. And that all of us are called to love and to extend grace. So drop your stones, encourage your dear sisters and brothers to live for something greater than their struggles. You know what I mean? And if you are still living and carrying that shame, and if it is still weighing you down, I encourage you to go before God, open up your word and allow that revelation that God is not hiding from you, and He clothes you so that you don't have to walk around in shame. Don't take that lightly. That is real. And allow that to sink into your heart and allow that to set you free. And if there are unconfessed sins in your life, I am telling you, okay, so I had talked about how one of my biggest fears was confessing, because I just didn't want to have to face the people that I was going to hurt. I didn't want to have to face the criticism. And so when we confess, I ended up having to confess in front of a group of people. Anyway, it was my choice. But I remember when I had that encounter with God before I confessed to Dustin, and I remember God saying, confess your sin before man and thousands will be saved and thousands will be healed. And I didn't know at that time what that would mean, and I still don't fully know what that means, but I knew that there was something about the power of confession. So when I confessed in front of our church, actually, afterwards, the most incredible thing happened. And that was people lined up to confess their sin to me. There was people that were like, I don't know why I feel like I just need to tell you this, but I had an abortion when I was 13 and I still feel the shame of it. And then the next person, I don't know why I feel like I need to tell you this, but I had an affair when, I was married and I still carry the shame of it. And the next person, I went through an ugly divorce and I still feel the shame of it. And it was mind blowing that these people are walking around still living in the shame that Jesus died to to carry. You know what I mean? But there's something about when you confess your sin, and although I severely disappointed people looked me in the face and they're like, I am so disappointed in you. Like, I had friends that literally told me, I can't be your friend anymore. I had people that, and like I said, started the worst rumors about me. Like, I actually faced my worst fear. My worst fear was that level of criticism. And even at the time of receiving that criticism, I promise you that the relief that came through confession was actually worth the criticism. And that's coming from a person who was a people pleaser to the grave. So I just encourage you that if you feel like, you don't have to do that in front of a church. Dear God, please don't do this. Don't confess in front of the church, but unless God tells you to. But if you feel like there is something that has been burdened inside of you that you have been hiding, I promise you that the power of confession and the freedom that comes from confession is so much more powerful and relieving than the criticism that comes. And it sucks to have to hurt people through your confession. Trust me, I know it. It sucks and it hurts. But there's so much freedom on the other side. So with that, I just encourage you, and I hope that you got some encouragement out of this episode. And that's the story. So until next time, I think next week that's in 2 weeks. We'll be doing a Q&A about some questions that you guys have for me and Dustin and our marriage. If you still want to submit questions, you can find me on Instagram, Cassandra Lau. Oh no, Beautifully Intentional. Oh my gosh. And you can DM me. Otherwise, yeah. Oh, and the last thing. Okay, then I really will leave you with this. A friend, Krista Blair, recorded this song recently called You Redeem. And it is so incredibly beautiful. And I feel like it is just even an anthem for this message. And so at the end of this episode, I'm leaving that song for you guys to listen to. You can also find it on anywhere that you stream your music. So iTunes, Spotify, whatever. It's under Citizens Worship. And so, but yeah, listen to this song and let this bring healing to you. All right, until next time.
In a world that only knows my shame, I can hear you call my name. You pour grace upon me. And by your love I've been set free, forsaken by the world but chosen by the Father. This broken heart I hold is all I have to offer. What could I give my holy King when all you want is all of me? You pour grace upon me. And by your love I have been set free, forsaken by the world but chosen by the Father. This broken heart I hold is all I have to offer. But you redeem. You called me up, you called me out. You said to me, where are your accusers now? Do you all run? Do you all shout? You said to me, where are your accusers now? You called me up, you called me out. You said to me, where are your accusers now? Do you all run? Do you all shout? You said to me, where are your accusers now? You called me up, you called me out. You said to me,